Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Broadband Universe podcast. I'm Craig Corbin, and it is a pleasure to welcome my guest today, Mr. Josh Hildebrandt, Director of Broadband Initiatives for the Georgia Technology Authority. Josh, welcome to the Broadband Universe.
Thank you so much, Craig, for the invitation to join you today and to speak a little bit about what all is going on in the broadband ecosystem or the broadband universe, as you just shared, and the general flavor and the general issues that we're working on in Georgia and what makes up the Georgia story.
To say that there are a number of things we can talk about would be an understatement, because I think you probably share the position that this is one of the most exciting times in the world of broadband and telecommunications in general, with phenomenal opportunities at the doorstep for the next decade or more, for not just Georgia, but nationwide, for the country to begin catching up to where we should be, perhaps, with the world of broadband. With respect to what's going on here in Georgia, so much to talk about, but let's quickly set the scene for those that don't know how Josh Hildebrandt wound up in the role that you have now with the state of Georgia.
Well, Craig, for me, I would like to say it was a unique and kind of winding journey of sorts. I've been working for the state for a number of years. Got started as a regional kind of field manager for then Secretary of State Brian Kemp, focused down in the southeast part of the state. As many people might know, the southeast, or might not know, in the southeast part of Georgia, there is a lot of rural communities down there. Yeah. So I routinely found myself in courthouses and city halls of quite small communities, that were agriculture-based, communities that maybe were watching a lot of the different opportunities and growth that the country was experiencing kind of passed them by of sorts. And it really made me appreciate the hardworking people in those communities and really how they survive and thrive to a degree during this time. From there, I transitioned into the new governor's office and administration, kind of building on that work that I was doing as that field manager in a rural part of the state by becoming the policy advisor for rural issues for the new governor, Brian Kemp. Many people think rural issues and they think agriculture, they think land use issues, they think environmental issues, all of these different things, sporting activities, hiking, hunting, fishing, all of those different activities. But as I came to quickly realize in that role, as I was traveling all throughout the state, broadband and a digital connection was a serious issue for those communities. And this was back in early 2019. So this was before even RDOF was completed. This was certainly before any of the COVID relief came to the states, and then before BEAD was passed. So it was a real issue, and there were not a whole lot of answers as to how to quickly broach and overcome some of the shortcomings that they were experiencing. And so that really put me on a good footing already years ago, before I got into this current role, in realizing just how important a digital connection was. For this boy from Chattanooga, Tennessee, or just outside of there, it was something that I always grew up with. Chattanooga is a little bit of a wonder story that the country and even the world knows over. And so I was able to benefit from that and see my parents and family benefit from kind of always having high-speed internet access. And I would be a little, I was a little shameful of me to go into a part of the country and realize that they did not have something along that was equal to what I experienced growing up. And that really, I think, put me on a good foundation to really realize that this is something that changes lives. This is something that helps people have equal opportunity, people to live where they want to live and have the job that they want to have. And so when this job became available, I was approached to come on board and to lead the state's efforts around, creating a better digitally connected Georgia.
And that's something that Governor Kemp has made a priority. It's obvious from day one. The foundation for so much of what has gone on, I think, goes back to one of the very first efforts, and that was to focus on having the right data to work with, the mapping. And all of us know that there's been a challenge there nationally for quite some time, but Georgia, really a pioneer with mapping, and the inclusion of the folks at the Carl Vinson Institute, University of Georgia, really supercharged that effort. Tell us how that all came about.
Sure. So when the office was created in 2018 via General Assembly bill and then a signature by the governor, one of the first things that everyone realized we needed to get to work on was figuring out where the unserved and underserved locations in the state were. You can't fix a problem if you don't know what that problem is. You can't you can't fix a leak if you don't know where that leak is. And so we got started with this idea that the state wanted to do this at a location level basis, because we were hearing stories all over the state where a neighborhood might be half served. One side of the road might be served, but the other side was not. Or going down, one road that it looked like there was infrastructure going down that road for the first mile, but the second mile did not have it. And we're all reasonable. We know why some of these cases exist now, which is, if there's a greater density in a certain area, or if someone happened to have plant in a certain area that they then built out, but then maybe, on the other side of a road they did not, and then that was difficult for a provider to do service there. So we knew we needed to look at the location level basis. And the thing is that still to this day, Georgia is a little bit unique in really wanting to focus at location level. Now, that policy choice, that selection to spend all of that time to compile a multi-million number database of locations is not easy. Right. And then sending that out to providers at such a high scale and then asking them to provide data is not easy for them to do. Right. So, especially at a time back in 2019, 2020, where the state had not even stood up a grant program yet, there was a lot of faith that we asked people to have in us to provide this data for the state to utilize funding for this, because it was really, I don't want to call it a homework assignment, but at that point, when we weren't asking or telling anybody that this is going to be used for an already established grant program and this is your way in, it was a little bit of it was a little bit of us asking for something and not really telling people what they were going to get out of it.
Sure.
So, the end result was the Georgia Broadband Availability Map. Craig, as you mentioned, this was one of the first, if not the first, location level map in the country. I like to call it that we were the pre-new FCC map before that came online. And it has really benefited us in our ability to quickly deploy funding.
And you talk about that provided a phenomenal foundation upon which to build those grant programs, and that has really taken off. You mentioned at that point there hadn't been any programs. That has certainly changed. Talk about that.
Oh yes. So the last 18 months has been quite something in the state of Georgia. This all started with, as you mentioned, this is a major priority of Governor Kemp's in Georgia. And when the state received COVID relief funds through the American Rescue Plan Act, one of the available uses to states was to use those funds for improving connections and connectivity. And that's not hard to see why. I think it was very applicable to that act and to what the country was trying to do, which was to help people somewhat, turned back up an overturned apple cart of what had happened, with COVID. Lives were upended, kids were no longer in school, hospitals and health clinics were greatly over capacity. Some of them were restricting the number of people that could come in, and then additionally, workplaces were shut down. So the fact that people were not fully connected, greatly inhibited their ability to live and to flourish. So Governor Kemp identified roughly $400 million of our state fiscal recovery funds for the state of Georgia to deploy via a grant program in Georgia for broadband expansion. He did that in June of 2020, and then already, because of the fact that we had an office established, because we had a state map established, we opened up a grant program to deploy those funds already just 3 months later. I don't know about you, but oftentimes government goes at a snail's pace, and in this situation, just a little bit. And in this case, we were able to kind of break that narrative and quickly get funds out the door. So by actually, that was not June 2020. That was June 2021.
Okay.
And then so in fall 2021, we created that program, ran it, and then the governor was already making announcements and obligating funds by February of 2022. So a very quick deployment, all based upon and made possible by way of our governor's leadership and the state's different resources and foundations around broadband staff and broadband data at that time.
Absolutely, and those deployments continue. We'll talk about that. You're watching the Broadband Universe podcast, brought to you by Lit Communities. Light up your community. You deserve better internet. My guest today, Josh Hildebrandt, Director of Broadband Initiatives with the Georgia Technology Authority. And we talk about the programs coming out just last week, another announced by Governor Kemp, as well as a local provider here in the state winning some middle mile funding last week as well. Things are really picking up with regard to the pace at which there is deployment here in the Peach State. Talk about that.
Yes, so I mentioned our first grant program that was roughly $400 million. We built upon that later in 2022, in the early part of 2023, as you just mentioned, Craig, with two more additional grant programs that together deployed just south of $250 million additional dollars. So in total, in about 18 months, the state has obligated nearly $650 million in funds to support broadband expansion in the state. And then, and many of those projects are already getting started, getting built, being finished, which is fantastic to see all of this before we ever even get to the BEAD program.
Right.
What we've seen as we have so quickly deployed this funding is that these projects are not cheap, right, and these projects are not quick. And we're asking a lot from our provider community. In Georgia, we really view this as a partnership project where it takes a village to get this done. Sure. It takes the state to make those investments. It then takes private industry to equally make sizable investments. For all three of the grant programs we've run, our average match is nearly 50%. So take that 640 million and add about another 600 million on top of that, and that's the total number of projects that are under contract in Georgia. And when you put that much pressure on industry and you ask that much, you need to be willing to listen to some of the issues that are being experienced by either local communities with such a pressure on permitting, and then also the pressure on those providers to deliver. of making sure and having the materials, making sure and having the workforce, uh, and to build into very unserved areas that do not have a lot of middle mile. And so we were very excited to see that middle mile grant delivered to the state of Georgia to help build out the middle mile open access middle mile network in Georgia, which is so important to making last mile deployments more affordable and to make it a lot quicker for them to build out and to get service turned on for customers.
And Josh, something you just mentioned I think is important. You talked about listening to all those involved in the process. And that's something that your team has done a phenomenal job of statewide, going to cities and towns all across the state. Talk about the feedback that you and your team received during some of those conversations.
Yeah, Craig. So we recently did or conducted a statewide listening tour where we went all across the state into all 12 regions of our 12 regional commissions, and led about 2 hour. Each one was about 2 hours, and each listening session was open to the public. We received folks from schools. We received individuals that were struggling and were hurting. We had community staff there from city managers and county administrators present. So it was a really diverse group of folks. And what we heard from them was a lot of what we've heard, which is, people are hurting. But we were able to really figure out why that was. And in many situations, we provided a great format and a great opportunity for these different folks and entities to engage with each other. And I think that's what is missing a lot of times at the local level. People can't or don't wish to approach their provider because their provider is who sends them bills and tells them that their rates are going up and some of these tough conversations. Yeah. And by bringing people together, you really create an environment where people realize that this does take a village, that there is work being done, that the providers in many cases are not making a mean choice to not improve service or something, but there is this idea of if a provider makes a commitment and gets out over the tips of their skis and they go belly up, well, guess what? That's a lot of people that have lost their service, and now we have to figure out that problem. And no one wants that. So, for us, it really is about bringing people together, realizing that no one is an enemy to this. Right. If they are, they're quickly going to be boxed out and they're going to find themselves alone. And I don't think anyone wants to be that. And so it really has changed, Craig. And I think that's what you kind of hinted at the beginning, which is folks are putting in the best infrastructure at rates unheard of in areas unheard of. Just going back a couple years, the game really has changed, and it's amazing to see that happening.
And that will be transformative for so many individuals, so many communities, so many municipalities, not just here in Georgia, but nationwide. Part of that, obviously, as we begin to wind down the conversation, the BEAD funding, Broadband Equity Access and Deployment Funds, that in days will begin with the initial allocation. Georgia, with projections to be, I think, the 10th highest amount of funding, about $1.5 billion if the projections are accurate. That is an immense amount of funding, but obviously there is so much to be done. It will not happen overnight, as we've talked about. The next decade is going to be very interesting to observe. Your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think what we're really going to turn to as BEAD gets deployed, the $640 million in projects that the state has under contract start finalizing. RDOF begins to finalize. I think what we're going to see is we're going to see a renaissance of sorts into communities that have been restricted by their lack of connectivity. We already saw this during COVID, that people that had a good connection were able to keep their jobs maybe in Atlanta or in Chicago, but move to somewhere with a little bit more space and a little bit more land. and they chose to do that. So I think this is, it's not going to be a silver bullet for some of these underserved areas and unserved areas, but I think it is going to unlock the potential for folks to finally be able to live in those areas and have the job that they want to have. And when we look at the completion of these projects, I think there needs to be a lot of care and attention given to the providers and to these communities to make sure as these networks get built and brought online that they are able to be operated, that they're able to be maintained in some of these very obscure, very rural areas. And that's going to take some attention by the state. And then lastly, in closing, I think there's going to be a lot more attention given on the people side of this. So that's going to be the consumer end of making sure that people have the right devices, making sure that people have the right digital literacy skills in order to fully utilize these high-speed connections to the best of their abilities to really improve their lives.
Well, I know I speak for all my fellow Georgians that we appreciate what you have done in your service to the state and all the folks across the state for so many years. Final question. I know that there's a great team and a growing team there at the Georgia Technology Authority. How best would people contact Jessica, Onisha, and the others on the team?
Yes, so one good thing about having a small team in Georgia is you can very easily get to the right person, and no question is too small. I literally yesterday just got an email from an individual providing their address and asking what service options are available at their house or what is due to come down the pipe if there's funding available to build to their location. And so talking with individuals about their individual connection issues is nothing too small, and then you just go up from there. Sure. So you can go to our website at gta.ga.gov. We have a broadband kind of button and link there, and then you quickly get to our contact information. We're not afraid to hide that, or not afraid to show that.
Right.
We make it abundantly clear what our individual phone numbers, and individual emails are. So just go to the website and reach out to Jessica, Onisha, and then soon to be a couple new members.
Awesome. Well, that is exciting. So much going on. And again, thank you for what you've done with the team here in Georgia. And thanks so much for being here on the Broadband Universe.
Thank you so much, Craig. It's been a pleasure.
Absolutely. On behalf of Josh, thanks for letting us be a part of your day. We'll see you next time right here on the Broadband Universe. So long, everyone.